Hello everyone, this is Kassi with LDRS Creative. Today I want to introduce you to one of my favorite parts of watercolor, and that is granulation. This is a term you may have heard of, but maybe didn't quite understand. So let's talk about it. What is granulation? Granulation is the visual texture that you get when your pigment particles settle unevenly on your paper. And you have a granulation spectrum all the way from non-granulating to supergranulating. So let's take a look at what that means. This first color that I just put down is quinacridone magenta. It is a non-granulated pigment, which means you will get a nice, flat, even wash. This is a very traditional look that many people want in a watercolor. It's also good for beginners because you don't have to worry about the uncertainty of granulation. The second color is Zoisite from Daniel Smith. This is a beautiful granulating green. And you can see even as I am painting this on that it's starting to get that kind of speckled look. Now this will change based on the paper that you're using. The rougher the texture of the paper, the more granulation you'll see. It will also change as it dries. Now this is caused by either different sized particles or just heavy particles that are suspended in the watercolor. And when they're on the paper, they settle off onto the bottom in kind of just clumps and uneven texture while the water is drying. This is great if you want to paint something that's textured like rocks or bricks or fur. I like to call this kind of a special effect paint. If you're wanting a really smooth, controlled watercolor wash, this probably isn't the best paint for you. These granulating watercolors love water. You get your best effects when you add quite a bit of water to them and let the water just do what it wants. They're great for loose styles of painting as opposed to the really tight, controlled stuff that you often see card makers use. That doesn't mean you can't use them in controlled settings. It just means you're not going to get the best granulating results in controlled painting. For the third type of granulation, I have a handmade watercolor by Mash's Watercolors. This is turquoise violet, and it is a color separating granulation. Some companies call it a super granulation, but what it is it is two or more pigments mixed with granulation, and those pigments, as they dry, they separate. So this purple is made up of some pinks and some blues, and you can see with enough water on there, the pink and the blue are moving at different speeds and they are settling down on the paper at different rates, and that causes the colors to separate. Now this again is another special effect watercolor. I love using this for flowers because you get just these very beautiful color mixes without having to actually work at it. It is also great for backgrounds. Just like our previous kind of granulation, this granulation loves water. The more water you can put on there, the more separation you're going to get. You also want to make sure you're not trying to force it or control it, because every time you stir up that paint, trying to move it, you're suspending those particles again and mixing them in instead of letting them settle out. This is great for loose washes and less controlled painting. Now all of these paints have their place, and I love using them all together for different reasons. But let's take a look at how we might use some of these granulating paints in a card. Because I want to make the most out of my granulation, I want to use a lot of water, but I don't want to lose the detail of the image. So I am working on some LDRS Creative Watercolor paper, and I've gone ahead and I have hot foiled the Sweet Rose press foil plate using the Decofoil's Opal foil. This is a clear rainbow foil. It's a beautiful foil, gives you a nice, almost a no-line look, but you can still see your lines. And this foil is going to act as a resist. This will ensure we don't lose our lines even if we paint over them. So I'm going to be working with a color separating watercolor, and I'm just going to grab a few brushes, make sure I have plenty of water off on the side. To start out, I'm just going to get some paint on my brush, and then I'm going to start at the base of a petal Doesn't really matter which petal, just choose a petal. At the base of the petal, I'm just going to add some paint. This will end up being your shadow area, so keep that in mind when you're placing your paint. I'm then taking a clean brush that just has water on it, and I'm starting at the top of the petal and bringing that water down into the paint. And I'm going to let that paint just kind of swirl and mix in the water. And like I said, I'm adding plenty of water. And while I am trying to keep the darkest concentration of water down at the base of the petal, I'm also just kind of letting the water and the paint do what they want. These organic movements of color is what really makes the magic of these color separating watercolors. Now at this point, you don't want to fuss too much. Just let it dry and see what happens. While we're waiting for that petal to dry, we can go ahead and move on to another petal. We're just repeating the same process, adding in our pigment and then moving it around with a fair amount of water. And then letting that water and paint just do their thing. And you're just going to continue moving through the whole flower bouquet doing this. Since this foil acts as a resist, you don't have to skip around like I am, but I do find it easier to paint next to dry areas rather than worrying about the paint spilling over into another wet area and just mixing up all of your shadows. So just going to keep adding in all of those petals and then just letting the water do its magic. As we're getting towards the centers of some of these roses, I am just going to add in some dark color and not worry about blending it out with the water nearly as much. That will create some nice shadows. Also, these areas are really small and you're not going to see a whole lot of color separation in them anyway. You can really see as these petals are drying the magic of color separating watercolors. Look at that shift from blues to pinks with the purples mixed in. That's really hard to do if you're trying to paint that yourself. But these almost paint themselves because the colors just separate on their own. And it makes painting these beautiful multicolored flowers so easy. For our leaves, I have chosen another color separating color. This is Soul of the Oak by Deep Deep Light. And we're going to do the same thing with this green that we did with our purple petals. For the most part, we are going to add one extra step for our leaves. I'm just going to go ahead and get my brush fully loaded and then go into where I want some of the darkest color in the shadows of my leaves. Add in my paint. And then I'll take that water and I will spread that out and let the colors start moving and mixing. Now while this is still wet, I am going to take this one step further, and this is just something that I like to do, but I'm going to take just a little bit of that purple from our petals, and I'm just going to get a nice watery mix of it and tap it into just a couple places on our leaf. You don't have to do this. I just like doing it. It makes the leaves look like they belong to the same plant as the flowers, and it gives it just that little extra something and doesn't take that much extra work. Now this green is going to color separate into a bunch of different colors. There's some pink in there, some blues, some greens, some browns. It's a really crazy color that I absolutely adore. And adding in just a little bit of purple will help tie it all together. While I'm finishing up these leaves, let's talk about some of the places that you can get granulating watercolors. Granulating watercolors have become very popular lately, which is great for you. It means there's lots of different options. Many of the well-established watercolor companies have granulating colors, including Daniel Smith, Schmincke, Holbein just came out with a granulating line. There's also some smaller companies like Roman Small. Rockwell has some great granulating colors. And then you also have some companies that are the handmade watercolors like Deep Deep Light, Masha's, Dusty Bee. Now, many of these paints are not your cheap paints. They are a little bit more pricey, but I think it's worth it. But ultimately, it's up to you if you think that the effect is worth the price. Now, to add in our stems, because you can't see them very well, I'm just taking a very small brush and I've loaded it up with my green, and I'm doing a very thin line on one side of the line. So you can't paint right onto that foil, so I'm just going on one side of the line and taking that line down. And then take that out with all the little tiny branches on all those little leaves, and all the way down to the bottom. Now this step is totally optional, but I love me a good splatter, so I am just tapping one brush that's loaded up with paint against another brush. Any stray speckles can be dabbed up with a paper towel. When all of our paint is dry, we can clean up our lines by taking a very fine brush with just water on it, wetting the lines, and then dabbing that off with a paper towel. So I'm just going over where the foil is. I'm not going anywhere else, just over the foil. I'll just keep doing that for all the little details that got covered up by the paint. You can see how they just pop to life. I absolutely love all the beautiful colors that we got from just those two paints. This truly is a fabulous way of painting flowers if you like having lots of different colors and you're okay with giving up a little bit of your control. Now that we have our flowers all painted, it's time to turn this into a card. So I'm just going to pop this in my Misty. Then I'm going to choose a sentiment from the coordinating stamp set. So this is the Sweet Rose stamp set. You could use the press and foil plate if you want. I just wanted to use the stamp. So I'm going to go ahead and place that in my Misty and pick that up. I'm going to ink it up with some Raven Black ink from LDRS Creative. And then I'll go ahead and stamp that down. Now, it's very common when you're using watercolor paper to need to stamp more than once. That is why the Misty is fabulous for this. I'm actually going to stamp it 3 times to get that really nice dark impression. Now I am going to keep this card fairly simple. I think it looks very elegant the way that it is. So I'm just going to take a black marker and add a doodled border around the whole card front. I am just not even caring if my lines are straight or not, just doing some very loose doodle lines. I'm going to go through and do it a second time, making sure to cross over those lines to make it look like those lines are interwoven. A few little scribbles here and there to make sure that nobody sees any of my mistakes. And I'm going to attach that to a top folding A2 card using some dry adhesive as well as some wet adhesive. I find this is the best way to attach watercolor paper to my card front and make sure that it stays. And here is our finished card. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about granulation today. I hope you give it a try. It is really fun. If you do, be sure to share with us in the LDRS Creative Facebook page. You can also tag LDRS Creative and me on Instagram. I would love to see what you're doing. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful and colorful creative day, and I'll see you soon.